Hey there, welcome back to our CBT Nuggets training course on SharePoint Server 2013 Core Solutions. The name of this lesson is Advanced Installation Options Practice. We have quite a bit of work to do in this demo, so I'm going to blow by this introductory screen as quickly and efficiently as I can. We're going to learn so-called advanced installation tasks for SharePoint Server 2013. In other words, how we can script out or automate as much as possible that installation and configuration process. Remember from the previous nugget that installation consists of several steps. The main ones are loading your appropriate server roles and prerequisite software packages. Then there's the binary load, installation. I tend to forget that S in this word for some reason. And then there's two phases of configuration. There's the config wizard, where we create the farm configuration database. We point to our SQL Server first, of course. We specify a passphrase, set up central administration, etc. At least on the first server of the farm. We have an option to do that for subsequent servers. And then the second phase of configuration is in central administration, where we have the choice to run the wizard, which is not preferred, or to manually install and enable service applications. That is the preferred way to go. And then we'll close by looking at and demoing deploying language packs in SharePoint Server. Let's get started. Let's begin by looking at and describing what you're seeing right now. This is, as you can tell, a Windows Server 2012 machine called SQLbox. It's a member server and that's it. I do, if I hit the Start key, have SQL Server 2012 installed locally, which is just for convenience sake. But it's not a domain controller, it's a member server, and I'm logged on as an administrator, as a domain administrator, so I'm not worried about any permissions issues. Now, let me walk you through this step by step. Let me go into my computer and File Explorer. What I did first is mount the SharePoint Server 2013 DVD, and I copied all of those contents into a folder called SPinstall. That I shared. So if I do the path whack whack SQLbox whack SPinstall, I'll see this. And as you see, line by line, it's the same stuff. You want to get your SharePoint media in a read-write shared location. Why read-write? Well, because we're going to be making modifications to some of the files in here. First of all, I want you to know that I'm going to slipstream the latest cumulative update package into the installation. This is an important exam alert that you need to understand how to do. You go to the SharePoint Tech Center at the Updates for SharePoint 2013 site, and it will give you monthly updates. Cumulative update cycling is monthly with SharePoint Server. Cumulative means you do not need to install previous updates. So I just downloaded the June 2013 update. That's the latest one as of my recording. You have to receive the download link via email. It's not a direct download. I've done that, and I've actually transferred the executable to the Updates subfolder in my SPinstall directory. It's important. It has to be in there. And the cumulative update is almost 2 gigs. I've never seen a CU package quite this large, to be honest with you. You'll recall in the whiteboard portion I told you that you can't use the exe. You have to unpack it. So let me pop open an elevated command prompt. I used Control X to open this cool little flyout. I'll select Command Prompt Admin. If you're using Windows Server 2012 R2, you can right-click in the lower left to get that same pop-up. And what I'll do once I've navigated into this directory is use tab completion and then the extract parameter. Now you'd specify extract : path if you weren't in the same directory like I am, or if you wanted this unpacked. If you weren't in updates and you wanted it packed into updates. I'm going to continue, and it's actually asking me where I want those files unpacked. That's just as well. I'll browse to where my shared folder is. There we go. And click OK. And then the contents of that exe, boom, will get popped down into this location. And they were successfully unzipped. But I've done goof. You see we have an executable inside an executable, so let's come back to the command prompt window and try and extract one more time. There we go. Accept the terms of the license agreements and continue, and let the raw contents of that executable come in. And we see we have XML manifest files, we have MSP transform files. You know you're getting warm when you see all of these contents happen. While we're waiting for that to complete, I wanted to take you to another page. This is from the Office Tech Center. Download and install 2013 prerequisites on Windows Server 2012. I'm going to temporarily take off my Give the Microsoft Answer hat and put on the Real World Systems Administrator hat. When it comes to doing this stuff, that is to say, using things like PowerShell and shell scripting to automate an installation of a Windows server, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are people out there, community members, who are much more proficient with PowerShell than you or I. Take advantage of their expertise. You might have to do a little bit of research. I tend to rely upon Google rankings. This is a very highly ranked article. And this individual, Craig Lucier, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Craig, put together 3 PowerShell scripts that can really fully automate the prerequisite phase of SharePoint installation. Now, you're not cheating, of course, using this. What's awesome about these is that they include not only the relevant PowerShell commandlets that you do need to know for your certification exam, but these scripts also include things like error handling routines, user interface elements where you're prompted for stuff instead of it just going out and doing stuff that you're not entirely sure what's happening. And it's documented, so you can learn. This guy's a really great PowerShell dude. Well, anyway, the 3 scripts are install 2013 roles and features, which will do the roles and features part. And he goes on to explain his motivation here. He does the installation exactly like it happens in prerequisiteinstaller.exe. And then, as far as the prereq files, there's 2 separate scripts. One that will just download them. This is the one we'll use in the demo. The other one that will download and install them for you. Isn't that awesome? So I would strongly suggest you get these files, study them, modify them to suit your needs. And like I said, it can save you a lot of time in scripting out a SharePoint installation and configuration. The same rule goes for farm configuration, which we'll get to afterwards. This is Codeplex.com. This is the Microsoft open source software code repository. And this is a project called AutoSP Installer. And we'll get to this shortly enough. But as you see here, you can do a farm installation and a service application load. And whereas when you run the wizard, you get all these crazy GUIDs and crazy named databases, when you run the script interactively, you can name your service application databases in a very nice way, as you see in this example. Another page, and we're actually going to be relying upon this, is from habaneroconsulting.com, automating the SharePoint 2013 installation and creating a farm with PowerShell. So I'll put up pop-up balloons. You've probably already seen them. Note that those cbt.gg shorty URLs that I give you are case sensitive. So make sure, I know it's difficult at times to differentiate between a 0 and an uppercase O or an L, lowercase l, and a 1. I totally get that, and I apologize about the convenience. But I figured using the URL shortening service would be a lot better. I mean, if you saw this particular URL, you'd probably gasp. Moving on, let's navigate to the root of my SP install folder, and you'll see we have prerequisiteinstaller.exe. This is the binary that's responsible for that prerequisite load. I'm going to open up 2 of those PowerShell files I showed you. Let's see, there's install prerequisite files. No, we don't want those. We want the install SP 2013 roles and features PS1 file and the download prereq SP1 file. I'm going to open up the PowerShell ISE as an administrator. PowerShell ISE is the integrated scripting environment that makes working with PowerShell a lot more like working with a traditional programming language and an integrated development environment. I like arranging it so we have the script file text on top and the console output at bottom. Let's do an open and grab that roles and features file. We don't have the time or the scope to go into the actual code here, but as you can see, it's pretty robust. And if you want to run the install Windows feature commandlet yourself, go for it. But it's a lot easier, I find, to use something like this. Now, you'll need to adjust the execution policy in order to run scripts on your system. I set mine to unrestricted temporarily, but we could get away with remote signed because these PowerShell scripts are in fact digitally signed. So in the prompt, I will run the script once. And like I said, the cool thing about these third-party community-created PowerShell scripts is that they have UI with warnings and stuff like that. I'm going to choose offline here. It's asking us where the media is. In my case, it's D sources SXS. I have just mounted the Windows Server 2012 DVD. And of course we have to restart. I'm not going to restart right now because I want to immediately jump to the prereq file download script that provides a convenient interface for tapping these Microsoft download links so you can see in plain text where it's getting those files. And when you run the script, it brings down those prereqs. I've already done this for us, and I'm just going to grab them and move them into the root level of my SP install folder. In other words, at the same level as prerequisite installer.exe. Now, the way we map the prerequisite installer exe to these downloaded prerequisites is we can either run prerequisite installer from the command line interactively in Point, or we can create an arguments file. And that arguments file simply contains the appropriate switches. It's absolutely crucial you don't have word wrap turned on and you have carriage returns. It has to be a single line of text. And you also want to edit. I have just a generic placeholder here, a local path or a UNC path for each of those packages. And once you're finished with the arguments file, we'll save it to the same location as prerequisite installer, which is my SP install folder. And it has to have the name prerequisite installer.arguments.txt. I'm not sure if the case matters here, but in the Microsoft literature they use capital P and capital A, so I'm going to do that as well. And now we can just run the prerequisite installer directly. Right-click, run as administrator, and we're gone. I'm going to have to reboot before I do that, though. We're back from our reboot, so let me kick off the prerequisite installer again. While that's kicking off, actually, I want to show you in your SharePoint installation directory, there's a folder called Files, and this is where your config.xml files are for automating the main binary installation of SharePoint. And they're arranged in categories. You can visit TechNet to learn the specifics. I'll go into Setup Farm and open up this guy and show you. They're pretty simple, really. The main thing you need to put in is the PID key value, which is your product ID or your license. All the other options are pretty good at a default level. And what you want to do here is take that config.xml, bring it into the same level as setup.exe, and then from an elevated command prompt, you just want to run setup with config : and then a path to the config.xml file. Now if the XML file's in the same directory as setup, you're golden. With regard to scripting out farm configuration, depending upon whether this is the first server in a new farm or an additional server, you'll use a different commandlet. Here I am in PowerShell ISE. You use new SharePoint farm to build out the configuration of the first SharePoint server. And you want to look at the syntax of this and know it for the exam. You can script out every single option. In my sample here, I don't have every option scripted out. I'm specifying the database server. I'm getting a credential for the database access account. You can provide a farm name and a passphrase, and you can even go beyond that, setting up central administration, choosing your port, all that good stuff as usual. And to that point, I want to draw you to this habaneroconsulting.com page that I told you about earlier. They've created and shared some PowerShell code here that does everything but the kitchen sink. It uses variables for just about every option. As you see here in the farm configuration section, we're storing the configuration passphrase as a variable, the server name, the database names, the port number for central admin, the authentication provider. Note that you do need, unless you're using the SharePoint Management Shell, you need to load the PowerShell commandlet. I'm doing an entire nugget on PowerShell v3 in SharePoint Server 2013 at the tail end of this course, so we'll discuss this in more detail then. But this PowerShell snap-in gives us the ability to run the rest of the commands. So the new SharePoint farm automates the farm configuration settings. If you're adding additional servers to a farm, there's Connect SP Configuration Database. But for things like creating central administration, you have a separate commandlet for that. You'll notice that all the SharePoint Server 2013 commandlets, the noun portion starts with SP, so that's a good hint. Now, if you're wondering how much of this do I need to know for the certification exam, you need to be able to recognize which commandlet is appropriate. So you'll want to know new SharePoint farm, and you may need to know new SP Central Administration, just your basic commands. new SP configuration database. Okay, so now I've given you the basics of automating prerequisite installation and server role installation, running the binary load portion of the installation, and then there's the config wizard / farm configuration stuff with PowerShell. That's cool. We're going to finish this out with how to install language packs. The way to extend SharePoint with language packs is first to download the appropriate pack. You go to Microsoft Download Center. It's a little bit confusing at first because you think, okay, well, yeah, my language is English, so maybe if I hit download, it's going to bring me all of the language packs that are available. That's not true. You select the target language from the list. I'm going to choose German, and then you download it. Now, you notice that the interface immediately changes to German. The file comes down as an image file, server language pack.image. All of the language packs have that same file name. So I've actually appended German so I know what it is. In Windows Server 2012, we can right-click and mount that disk image file, and then run setup.exe. Right-click and run that as administrator. Now you notice here that the interface is in that target language. So you have to do some creative clicking here to accept the license agreement and click Next, and it's going to go through and install for us in that language. The good news is that if you've completed SharePoint installation in your own language at least once, you're familiar with what to expect. We'll leave this option checked and click this. I wouldn't have any idea how to pronounce that word, but we need to run through the SharePoint Products Configuration Wizard to update SQL Server. Interestingly, this is in English, and it just jumps right in. It's setting registry keys. All of the German template files are now laid down in my C drive. We're now just making connections in the registry, in the SQL databases, as I said. Configuration is successful. That's always a good thing. Now that the language pack has been fully integrated into the farm, all we have left to do is create a new site collection, site or subsite, using the localized language files. From my SharePoint 80 site, I'll come to Site Contents in the current navigation, scroll down under Subsites, and click New Subsite. I'll give the site a title, a virtual directory URL name, and check this out. This is the money right here. Template selection, English or German. I'll make it a team website. I'll inherit the permissions. I'll display the link on the quick launch, and I'll use the top link bar from the parent site, and we'll click Create to build out that subsite. And here we are. You can see that the user interface elements are localized in that language, including the controls like New Document. If we go to the Documents library, you'll notice that the ribbon elements are all localized. Pretty easy to do. Review time. SharePoint 2013 Advanced Installation Tasks. In this lesson, you now understand the mechanics of automating a SharePoint 2013 install. This is excellent for documentation purposes. It's excellent if you need to roll out a bunch of servers with the same or similar configurations. And it's also great if you want a script to avoid human errors that can occur during an attended installation. So we know about scripting out the prerequisites and the server role installation, the binary load, and the two phases of configuration, the config wizard, and then the farm config. You also understand how to obtain language packs and install and use those in a SharePoint Server 2013 farm. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.